I've always been a creature of habit. I'm constantly engaged in some sort of routine that I've found myself comfortable in, whether that be eating the same meal every day or cyclically rewatching a show I love. These are certainly coping mechanisms of some sort. At one of my lowest points in life, I spent 3 weeks eating nothing but Celeste frozen pizza and Act 2 movie theater butter popcorn and rewatching my favorite series over and over. As such, repetition has always been a theme I'm interested in. Tatami Galaxy is a show built around repetition and obsession. Each episode, the protagonist begins his college experience choosing a club to join in search of his rose colored campus life. And what follows is how his college experience changes. At the end of each episode, a clock rewinds and the Groundhog Day loop is restarted. This premise is immediately appealing to someone like me, who, if you couldn't tell, has had some struggles with their own mental health. I've spent my entire life paralyzed by fear and anxiety, and with that as your default state of mind, you tend to spend a lot of time daydreaming, building up these what if hypotheticals of how your life could have gone had you done this or that. Anxiety induced paralysis has prevented me from making so many decisions and led to me missing out on so many brand new, potentially life changing experiences. The main character of Tatami Galaxy, who I'll refer to as Watashi, is a somewhat miserable presence. He's unendingly negative, proud, entitled, and generally believes himself to be above the people around him. He feels he's the best at everything, only held down by circumstance and others. He's insatiably horny and obsessed with raven haired maidens. His dick is a cowboy named Johnny, and they have a number of conversations where it's clear Watashi has very little control over his urges. He constantly complains about the situations he finds himself in and blames everyone but himself for them. He's completely fixated on this idea of the rose colored campus life he desires so much. As someone who grew up with a monumental superiority complex, I connected with Watashi immediately. Tatami Galaxy is one of those rare stories focused on a kid who starts out as an asshole for no real reason outside of seemingly just being that way, who's then opened up to the world and learns that fulfilling interpersonal relationships are absolutely essential to happiness, and even those you're closest to have a complex inner life you are not privy to. Throughout the journey of Tatami, Watashi meets a wide cast of unique characters, each with their own idiosyncrasies and motivating passions. In the first scene of the first episode, Watashi is met with a god of a nearby shrine at Neko Ramen, the ramen cart rumored to use real cats in its broth. He's confronted immediately with all of the traits he hates about himself: his laziness, his inability to open up to others, how his romantic failure led to interfering with others' paths to love. He's asked why he spent his college years this way, and he responds, because Ozu, before being cut off by the god, who admits that while Ozu may have dirtied his soul to a degree, that's not the whole story. Watashi deflects this and says it's none of his business. The god tells him that he's responsible for deciding the relationships of man and woman, and he's tasked on deciding whether Akashi, a friend of his, will end up with Ozu or Watashi. With this, the opening theme plays, and time is rewound to show the beginning of his college experience. In this episode, in order to grasp that rose-colored campus life he so desperately desires, he joins the tennis circle. He realizes almost immediately that making friends is exceedingly difficult for him, and by the time he realized that he had to be sociable in order to do so, it was already too late. This is when he meets Ozu, his best friend and rival throughout the series. He's described as being an ominous man with a face of ill portent. He's a devious little rascal with his hands in every pot around the school, seemingly able to balance everything and show up no matter what Watashi does with his time at school. They're shown sometime later setting off fireworks to disrupt a celebration couples were taking part in, and Watashi describes Ozu's negative traits, namely eating the happiness of others as a topping on his rice, a man with seriously not a single point worthy of praise. This is also, not coincidentally, a fitting descriptor for Watashi himself. He shifts the blame of this onto Ozu, stating, "My soul would have surely stayed unblemished were it not for having met him." He complains about not having a raven-haired maiden next to him, and he's made aware of Akashi's presence. Akashi is an engineering student, intelligent, driven, and rather happy in her existence. They proclaim their intent to ruin the night and set off the fireworks as Akashi calls him an idiot and disappears behind a tree. She drinks her sake calmly as fireworks rain down and couples scramble. Later encounters a fortune teller who advises him that he's unsatisfied in life and his fierce inner talent is not utilized. A recurring motif where she tells him what he wants to hear, telling him opportunity is hanging right before his eyes. At a dinner later on, Ozu asks Watashi how he feels about Akashi, to which he is flustered and blames Ozu for his negative outcome in college. Akashi comes in to eat their food and tells them to leave before the bill shows up, reminding him to keep his promise. This prompts Watashi to remember how he met her. At a book fair, he witnessed her immense presence and confidence and fell for her immediately. Ozu brings a cake to his room later as a form of punishment, as there's nothing less lonely than eating a castella alone. Watashi regrets that he's not eating it with Akashi, and surprises even himself when her name came to mind. He's frustrated that the gods are deciding his fate. However, it would go against his beliefs to seek the comfort of a stranger from this transient loneliness. He works himself up about the possibility of Akashi falling for Ozu and the lack of control he has over the situations, and snaps, devouring the castella with his bare hands. He looks up and is reminded of the promise he made to Akashi, that he would take her out to eat at the ramen cart nearby. He's found the last of her mochi guma, which is a little stress toy that she has a number of, and has continuously failed to return it. He decides he has to choose to be happy, and so he asks the god he met prior to match him and Akashi together, and the god tells him to meet on a bridge, and at the time when he shows up, a festival is occurring, at which point the god tells him to cross it and ask her out on a date. He tries to do so, but at the last minute he's overwhelmed and freezes, he's unable to do it. And then Ozu shows up dressed up in women's clothing, being attacked by a horde of angry people and yelling at Watashi to follow the god of love's advice. Ozu is pushed up to the top of a light fixture before being knocked into the swollen river, and Watashi is thrown in as well, as they believe that he is friends with Ozu. As he falls, he's upset he chose to join the tennis circle, and a clock tower rewinds to the beginning of his college experience. Okay, that was a lot. Let's take a breather. As you can tell, this series is kind of a hectic mess. At this point, if you haven't seen the series, I really cannot recommend watching it enough before you complete the video. I will be spoiling the conclusion, and there are only 11 episodes, and as you can tell, I hold a lot of love for this series, so I wouldn't want it to be spoiled for anyone else who might get something out of it like I did. There are a number of other important characters introduced throughout the series, touching and being touched by Watashi's involvement in their life. However, I'll leave them out for brevity's sake. His life doesn't necessarily improve in episodes 2 through 9, however the world is built and the groundwork established for what could be a successful rose-colored campus life. This cycle of different clubs is broken in the 10th episode, when Watashi chooses not to join any clubs, but to stay in his dorm and avoid all contact with the outside world. I am obsessed with the idea of obsession. I'm constantly becoming obsessed with new things until that obsession inevitably wavers, and the reason I find Tatami Galaxy so appealing is that Watashi feels the same. Each episode, he chases a potential obsession, something to focus on and be motivated by, and ultimately fails to become truly engaged. My favorite pieces of media have always centered around obsessive passion, whether that be the compulsive sushi making of Jiro Dreams of Sushi, the unstoppable drive to create of the developers in Indie Game the Movie, or the attempts to grab hold of said passion in Ping Pong the Animation. I think what I desire more than anything is to have that singular, essential drive to my life, a reason to keep on living that motivates and excites me every day when I wake up. The final arc shows Watashi's truest form, using apathy as a defense mechanism. He's at his coldest, his most angry and unproductive you see him thus far, and not coincidentally, also the most unhappy. In episode 10, he does all he can to force himself to obsess over the beauty and perfection of the 4.5 tatami room he finds himself encased within. He believes the rose-colored campus life to be nothing more than an illusion, which is true, but not for the reasons he believes. One morning he finds that no matter how he exits his room, he ends up in another version of the same room. He's upset, but once again convinces himself that this is not a bad world to be stuck in, rather a blessing. It allows him to be in total control over the world around him, a feeling that he has always been desperate for, and seemingly what the ultimate goal of locking himself in his room was. He busies himself with the hobbies available to him. However, between gathering money, studying, drinking, reading, nothing is able to give his life purpose in the prison he's found himself stuck in. He comes to the realization that a life without others is miserable, and no amount of convincing himself of his own potential could make up for that. Nothing seems to work in escaping this maze, but he realizes that each room is a parallel world's version of his room. He peers into all of the lives he could have lived, learns all of the colorful characters in his life in each of these worlds, and despairs that he's missed out on all of the wonderful experiences that could have been. He sobs uncontrollably and devours a Castella, lamenting how even though these lives don't seem rose-colored, they do seem to be fun, something he himself had entirely missed out on while absorbed in his solitary delusions. He describes protecting himself from the outside world as donning impenetrable armor and a nonchalant smile, yet the more successful he is, the more crushing his loneliness becomes. He comes to the realization that everyone is far too complex to ever truly understand, and that judging anyone from a glance is doing them and yourself a disservice. He wishes one final time to return back to his first day of college, and time rewinds. This time, the outro plays at the beginning of the final episode, a sign of the end of this vicious cycle. He learns from a phone he left behind that Ozu is walking right into the clutches of his enemies in attempting to steal an airship to take his secret girlfriend, with whom he shares an uncharacteristically pure love, on a sightseeing tour of the festival from episode 1. He tries to text Ozu using the phone he found, but the battery dies. He thinks to himself all the fun experiences he would take part in if he was able to leave this hell before somehow looping all the way back to his original room. He realizes he had been taking what he had for granted because he was too stuck on his idea of what his ideal college experience should be. With this, he thinks back on meeting Akashi and finding the Mochiguma, and finally grabs hold of the opportunity hanging right before his eyes. He's overcome by moths and launched out of his 4.5 tatami hell, sprinting into the world to find it's the night of the festival. He cries as he sees Ozu nearly being pushed off the bridge and yells out his name. As he runs to him, his clothes and beard fall away, leaving behind the weight of his past, and he leaps onto the bridge with Ozu. The horde of moths fly through as they embrace, and they are knocked into the water. However, this time, Watashi holds Ozu and saves both of their lives. They're safely recovered. Ozu's taken away in an ambulance, and Watashi returns the Mochiguma to Akashi finally. He confidently asks her out to Neko Ramen, which she's happy to accept. Watashi tells the viewers that the purpose of the program is not to tell the viewers about their relationship, as nothing else is as boring to tell as a story of successful love. However, a short epilogue lets the viewers see that Watashi, Akashi, Ozu, and the cast of side characters are all happy. With that, the opening song plays, for Watashi's life has truly begun. What elevates Tatami Galaxy for me is the ultimate realization that none of these things can be forced into being. A passion, an obsession, a spark cannot be born out of a desire to have one. And the only way to find what can motivate you to keep on living is to be open to experiences and others, and to take what comes as it comes. When I was young, I enjoyed cooking, and I latched onto that idea as a potential passion. My plan was to get my bachelor's degree to appease those around me before pursuing my true passion and going into the culinary world. This plan was stopped dead in its tracks when, during my freshman year, my hands stopped working. I woke up one day and my hands just wouldn't close. This would turn out, after an agonizing couple of years of doctor's visits, blood tests, and imaging, to be a manifestation of undiagnosed juvenile psoriatic arthritis. I felt betrayed, cheated by my own body out of that passion. And I feel that this point was when I truly latched onto this idea that cooking was my passion. I think knowing that I could never do it made it into an easy out. I could tell myself that I did have that obsession, that drive that I admired and desired with all of my soul, but I've realized that just wasn't the case. Just like every other thing I had latched onto, it was only temporary. The enjoyment and passion had worn off, and it was nothing more than a shadow of my desire to feel it. I'm not free from this desire, of course, but I'm improving. A singular, essential passion will never drive my life. It just isn't in my nature. In the times when I've felt closest to death, the thin veil that prevented me from crossing that barrier was essentially the hope that Tatami Galaxy was right. It was all I could do to remind myself that situations change, new people will come into my life, and I can still find the things that will make me feel motivated and excited. On the night that I stood on the top ledge of the parking garage at my college, I convinced myself to get down, and when I got home, I watched the final two episodes of Tatami. Locking myself inside to avoid the pain of experiencing the world did nothing but worsen it and prevent me from experiencing what I could have been experiencing. I couldn't sit around and mourn my lack of motivation, and if there was any hope of finding what that drive may be, it certainly couldn't be found sitting in my room repeating the same thought process. Tatami Galaxy has consistently reminded me that I need to do everything in my power to curb this tendency, to leave the safety of repetition and routine found in solitude and put myself out into the world. My only chance at happiness in this world comes from being open, and I don't need some magical singular passion to live a satisfying life. I could not be more grateful that I found this show when I was young. I don't know if I'd still be around without it.
Sometimes life gets you down, but you can turn it all around. The raindrops keep falling, you're soaked into the bone, and you can't see for the clouds. Sometimes life isn't fair, but you can really don't despair. You win some, you lose some, and then you lose some more. You even played your best. But just round the corner, the sun's looking down, and maybe love's here today. The happy days are coming again. Sometimes life is a drag. Get that chill up, don't be sad. There's somebody out there is looking out for you, and now they're making plans. But just round the corner, well, the real truth is that nobody really knows. Life sure doesn't make sense. Bet on your boots, you can bet that everybody